Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of React Native Radio. Today on our panel, we have Chris Reyes.
Hey everybody.
Jamon Holmgren.
Hey everyone.
And I'm Josh Justice. Hello. And today our special guest is Omri Bruchim. Say hello.
Hey everyone.
Omri, why don't you tell us a bit about yourself, who you are, what you do, why you're famous?
Famous. Okay, so first of all, hello everyone. I'm Omri. I'm from Israel, Tel Aviv. And today I'm leading the mobile platform development at Wix. Actually, my background is a full stack developer, server developer, and lately I came into the mobile side. I start from iOS, so my background is iOS developer. But today I'm totally into React Native. I'm working mostly about performance and architecture, like this.
Great. Well, we're glad you're here.
When I'm building a new product, G2I is the company that I call to help me find a developer who can build it. G2I is a hiring platform run by engineers that matches you with React, React Native, GraphQL, and mobile developers that you can trust. Whether you are a new company building your first product or an established company that wants additional engineering help, G2I has the talent you need to accomplish your goals. Go to g2i.co to learn more about what G2I has to offer. In my experience, G2I has linked me up with experienced engineers that can fit my budget. And the G2I staff are friendly and easy to work with. They know how product development works and can help you find the perfect engineer for your stack. Go to g2i.co to learn more about G2I.
There's a bunch of things about Wix that we could get into. First, I wanted to ask you about a talk at React Advanced London that you gave. It's called React Native at Wix, Architecture for Apps in Scale. And you had some really interesting things to share about the way Wix approaches the architecture of your React Native app. Do you want to start out by giving us just sort of an overview of the talk and what you got into?
Yes, sure. So actually, before I start, I just want to say that I joined Wix about 3 years ago. And when I started using React Native, I started to follow all the people in Twitter and stuff that talk about React Native. And I understand that there is a problem in the community. That's a lot of people, mostly developer. It came mostly from native developers, that if you have a big application, you are corporate, maybe React Native is not for you. And I wonder why, because at Wix we are today kind of 100 developers almost working on the same application. And at the beginning it was a little bit tough because we started from one single small repository in a GitHub and work on the same repository, everyone on the same features. And then we grow and we understand that it's impossible to work on the same way, but we think differently and we change the architecture. And this is what all the talk is about. I explained how we did what we did, and I explained why it's different from a simple React Native application. And actually, the main idea, and we can read into it, when you work with React, when you do your architecture of the application, you need to think about the architecture of your company, of the organization that you are in. And in 2 weeks, we are split into something that's called companies. Companies is like small groups inside Wix, and each one of them work on different product. Let's take an example. We have kind of a Wix restaurant that had solution for business that is restaurant. So you can take orders, you can order a table. So it's a bunch of people working on simple product. They have their own resources like mobile developers. In our case, it's React Native developers, server developers, product managers, user UX, and all other stuff. And they build solution inside Wix. And the same for, let's say, photography or let's say booking services. If you have a studio of yoga and you want to allow your members to book a service and to notify if there is any place they are in the waiting list and they have a free spot, so you want to notify them and they can book a service. So we have different companies inside a huge company called Wix. So we need to think different, but in the application itself. So we decided to create something we call a Wix Mobile OS operation system. Short, we call it the engine. So the engine is kind of the entry point of our application. It means that you can run the engine by itself. It's like run Android without application. And it's same like you open Chrome and run it without any extension. And then we give the other companies, we call them technically modules, we give them the opportunity to join to the party and bring their own functionality. Let's say restaurant, for example. So they can expose functions, they can expose their own screens. They have lifecycle events. For example, the initialize function, what happened when the user logged in to his account at Wix. Can you maybe you want to show him something, and there is a lot of other examples, but in that way we can allow all the verticals. We have currently 32 to bring their own product, and like the OS give you the option to click on an icon and open the application itself. In our case, the UI is a little bit different. It's not application, but it looks seamless for the user. So if for example he has a website, he built in Wix a website that give you the option to. He is a photographer, he has albums. So immediately when the user logged in, the model itself asks if this user has service that's called photography, and then he can show him his albums. That's basically the idea, and this is only the architecture. Why we did this strange architecture? So we split React Native application into some different entities. The first one is what I talked about, is the engine. The engine is actually the SDK. Some people can call him the platform itself, the OS. The engine includes all the native code in React Native. It includes a lot of JavaScript APIs. For example, the BI architecture, localization, all what you can think about it is infrastructure, push notification, and all the rest. And it gives the modules, the companies themselves to concentrate in the product without need to understand if the app is in the background or the foreground, and what should I do if I got a push notification. So the first entity is the engine. This is the main part. And then we have the modules. The modules are kind of extension to the application. They're written only in JavaScript, and they allow to bring other JavaScript libraries, only JavaScript, just because, as I said before, all the native code and all the native dependencies should be only in the engine. And it's lead me to the next question that you may have: why only in the engine? So why to put all the native in the engine? What's happening if some module, let's say, we have actually this kind of example. We have a module that's called stores. The stores is the e-com sites in Wix, and they want to bring a module or native dependencies of point of sale or some hardware to get credit card. You can't do it with JavaScript. Of course, you needed the API for the native. So they need to pull request into the engine with the new dependency, or in the other way, with the implementation itself in the iOS and Android project. And we approve it. And then in the next release of the engine, it's going to be available for them. Now you can see only the downside of it because they're blocked by me. But at the end, we have different release cycles for module in the engine. Module, we can see it as a release of iOS, is released every 2-3 weeks. And it came with a lot of new features, fixes, crash fixes. On the other hand, modules can release a version every day because it's product oriented. it's much more faster. And what we got from all this infrastructure, so basically, we want to get to build something that is mostly like Expo, that you as a JavaScript kind of React Native developer shouldn't be messed with native stuff. Wix is a web-oriented company, to be honest. We are not everybody know, but Wix include more than 3,000 people, and half of them is R&D, and most of the developer are web developer, JavaScript. And we want to allow them to write code into the app. So we want to create our own Expo. Our own Expo, it means that they have the engine as a dev dependency and run the app, and they immediately see all the platform without any code. And then they can expose their own functions, their own screens, and we can elaborate it more later, but they have the platform to build their own product without matter what other modules do. At the end, we integrated all the modules to the same application, and it works like a charm. And one point before we continue, the most interesting part in all of this that we actually flip the diagram. Most cases, me as native developer create an application, and I have my own, let's say for example, libraries, React Native libraries. So in React Native libraries, you have your own JavaScript code, you have the iOS code, mostly it's example project, you have an example project for Android as well, and then when someone else use your native library, it's not necessarily work, because maybe you define something in your example project. And this is something that we want to avoid. We didn't want each one of the module to have its example project. We want all of them to work on the same native project, and they add their code as dependencies, and it has much more benefits than downsides. We can talk about it now, but this is the main idea.
Yeah, this separation between the modules that are JavaScript and the infrastructure that includes native code made a ton of sense to me as soon as I heard you describe that in your talk. I think however your company is, or however your project is set up, I think across the React Native world, we have this common understanding that not every JavaScript developer knows native code. And some JavaScript developers might dive into it a little bit, but not frequently. And so at least at your organization side, splitting out the pieces into the native part and the JavaScript part makes a lot of sense in terms of breaking down the roles and responsibilities.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me what it's like for a JavaScript developer working on one of the modules day to day. They want to pull down their code. They want to implement their new feature. So are they booting up Xcode or Android Studio to get it running? Like, what do they do to run their module and work on it?
Okay, cool. So we try to make it as simple as we can. We think about module developer as JavaScript developer and not a native one. It's nice to put it on the paper that as React Native developer, you shouldn't mess with native, but in reality is not true, because you need to open Xcode and you need to open Android Studio and you need to be familiar with ADB and all the rest, and you want to eliminate all this knowledge for a new module developer. So the engine includes tons of scripts. The first part is scripts. It means that you bring, as I said before, the engine of the dev dependencies, and then suddenly we expose you to a lot of simple codes, like you have React Native Start. So you have engine start, and you have engine start for iOS and engine start for Android, and you can run the engine as a mock mode. Mock mode, it means that you want to run tests on the engine, and you can run engine. For example, we have module that's called the login module. It means that you should be able, if you want to be able to log in to Wix account, and then do something with your account. So as a module developer, I don't expect all the module to bring the login as the dev dependency as well. So we expose something that's called mock mode quick login. It means that in your package.json, you can put email and password, and then you run the engine already logged in. So we did all this stuff, and this is the first part. The second part, as your question before, we do not expect any of them that's open Xcode or Android Studio at all, just because their code is only JavaScript. It means that they can run the engine, and from that moment, they just need to click on Command R if they want to refresh the app. There is no option to change the native code from their side, only from the engine. So the experience is mostly like a developer a website in React and not in React Native. We make it webby, much more webby than native application. They, of course, work with simulator on the emulator in iOS and Android, but nothing to do with Android Studio and Xcode. Only with the terminal itself. Lately, actually, it was some POC that we did. We create a Mac application that is actually the GUI for the engine API. Instead of remember all the how to open, let's say I want to run the engine or my code on specific simulator on tablet, iPad from iOS 11. So I need to remember the stuff. So we did it. We made a UI for all of it. It's something that look like something between Android Studio and Xcode. A lot of buttons, but at the end is commands. I mean, to see logs for Android, in the background it's one ADB logcat and output to the screen instead of the terminal. To run the emulator, we run the code behind is run ADB devices and start the specific emulator. So it's make the JavaScript developer that have nothing to do, they're not familiar with ADB or Android at all, to make simple tasks like native developer.
So this is Jamon. We're working on our first Expo app. We, for a long time, couldn't really do Expo because we needed custom stuff under the hood, and we were writing native code to do that. And so I had a question kind of in my mind as I was kind of listening to you explain this architecture. Why not just use Expo to start with? But I think you answered that, because you need functionality, native functionality beyond what Expo provides. You need to be able to bring in kind of, like you said, your own version of Expo with its own native dependencies, its own native code. Mm-hmm. And that actually makes a lot of sense to me. And in a lot of ways, the folks at Expo are building kind of a browser is what they're building. And that's kind of what you're doing as well. You're building a custom browser for your own app. Now it's not a full browser.
You can see it that way. We kind of creating a black box for the developer.
Yeah.
Black box is something that they can inject their own code, but it's going to be available later.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's very JavaScript focused, because then the rest of your team can, as JavaScript developers, use the JavaScript APIs that you're exposing to them to get done what they need to do. It makes a lot of sense to me. The project with Expo that we're doing is going well, but of course, we have to make sure that if we have a native dependency, that it's something that Expo supports.
I think that Expo is perfect for, I don't say POC or something, but it's great for the beginning. But at the second, once you have a specific thing that you need, I met a company a few weeks ago that have some different functionality with Bluetooth, and they're missing these features in Expo, so they're kind of stuck, and that's why exactly we implemented our own Expo. Actually, we had similar functionality and feature like Expo. For example, we implemented the kind of copy the bundle. Let's say we want to debug my bundle, my local changes on real devices. So we implemented the same with QR code. You run the bundle. It's called, let's say, engine create QR code. And on your computer, it's bundled the JavaScript code. And then you have QR code in your terminal. And you have a specific engine version in your hand. And you scan the QR code. And the second, we copy the bundle inside over the air, like code push, for example, and then you can debug the application with a real device without connecting to the computer at all. So it's almost the same. We actually support it on release to show the warning, the yellow warning on the red screens, to make development experience in debug, but with real device in release.
Infinite Red has been designing and shipping and building web and mobile applications for 10 years. They're experts in React Native and passionate advocates for remote work. They also host North America's only React Native conference, Chain React, attended by hundreds of developers all over the world. I actually went this last year. It was a ton of fun. If you start a project after hearing about them on this podcast, they'll give you 2 free tickets. You can learn more at radio.infinite.red.
So you mentioned in your talk that Wix is one of the largest React Native applications in the world. So clearly y'all have lots and lots of engineering resources to put into this. I'm curious, this need for the separation of roles, the JavaScript role and the native code infrastructure role, even small teams, 10, 20 developers of React Native will talk about this need. Do you think something like your architecture approach here could work at a smaller level, or does it only make sense once you get to like 100 developers or more?
Yeah, definitely it should be from day one of projects. I mean, it's when you come into React Native, probably you want to run fast. So I'm not sure that from day one you can go and implement this, I don't know how to call it, strange architecture. But to be honest, it can save you a lot of time after, because I met few people from small startup that has React Native applications, and they're a group of 10 people, 10 developers. And even with 10 developers, they have the same problem that we had at the beginning of Wix application. We don't know if we want to run on single repo or mono repo. Most of the developers that work with React Native has CI issues. It means that every small change, I need to build the all native application, both for iOS and Android. So actually, our approach solved this issue as well, because if you change your code in the module, your build shouldn't build all the native code itself because it's already built. So we just bundle your code and release a new version of the module. So it saves a lot of time. It has its own challenges. I know, but it saves you a lot of time, and it makes much more sense to work even on small companies.
Yeah, I want to comment on that. I really agree. I'm from a smaller shop too, and even one of our pain points, which I think you identified in your talk with, was ownership. And that's where you guys kind of came up with the process of companies, and each company has, I think, a server-side developer, a JavaScript, and then like a product owner. Is that what it was?
Yeah. Not necessarily one of them, but we have companies with 10 developers, 10 product managers, and it depends on how big is the company. But yes, we have all kind of stack in one company.
Yeah, and I see even where we're at, we would kind of have those gaps in knowledge where certain projects will be missing that key person where that's an issue. So I really like the idea you guys went with that company, and that kind of leads me to my question. Mm-hmm. When you guys are starting a new app, what is that process like for ownership of the modules? And, I'm assuming you guys have multiple companies that will combine on an app. Where does that kind of process start? Is there like a planning meeting in terms when you guys discuss this architecture, or how does that exactly work?
Okay, so basically, you're talking about we need to some new company, new model want to integrate it into the app.
Yeah.
So let's talk technically. Technically, we have a template for module. Template for module means that we create a kind of JavaScript library with two imported files. One is the module.js. Module.js is the file that you expose all the functionality of your application. Like I said, functions, deep links. Deep links, for example, is when we got a push notification and the user click on it, and the notification include link. And then I ask all the modules, is this link is your link? Do you have? I search for the owner of this link, and then he is the owner of do the functionality, open screen, and all the stuff. So the most important part is the module.js, where you expose all your stuff. And the second part is the package.json, that you have the engine of the dependencies. And if you have your own JavaScript library, so you put it in package.json. Technically, that's all. The only missing part is we need to add your model into the main repository as a dependencies, because otherwise you won't include in the app. So this is technically, we try to make the minimum for you to be in the application. Now you're talking about the process. So actually it's a pain. Why is it a pain? Because I'm totally honest, because we are growing super fast, and every day there is a new company in weeks that I even didn't know that his exist. Come into my Slack and ask me, hey, I implemented a new model. I want to be part of the app. And now the question is, I need to overview his code. Can I give you the opportunity to do whatever you want? So most of the time, I just review his module.js. I can see, I want to see that, for example, he didn't do any network request in the init function. Why? Because it can hurt the startup time of the application. So there are some places, some areas that is still risky by the model. You know, we are working on JavaScript world. You have a global context. You can ruin the app without knowing about it. So I feel responsible as the mobile platform owner to review a new model. But basically is 1 hour to make a new model and put it in the app. So it's super easy.
That's really cool. And yeah, other than that, the other thing, and since we're kind of on the topic of companies, a big part of Wix, or for me on the outside, what I see Wix as is their open source contribution. And you kind of mentioned that in your talk as well. So I was curious, how do you guys have a dedicated open source company, or does each company kind of, when they're developing something, say like, okay, let's open source this?
Yeah, of course. It's interesting because I have between 30 to 40 minutes talk, and in my talks, after the talks, most of the people come and stand in the line, and at the end they ask me about the open source. It's only one slide from all of my talk, but I agree with you. Wix is known for his contribution to open source. So I tell you how it works. I talked with you about the companies. The company is small groups, product oriented. But on the other hand, we have something that's called guild. And it's not something that we invent in Wix. I know that it's included in Spotify company and other. What is guild? Guild is your expertise group. For example, we have the mobile guild, the fat guild, the server guild. And actually 20% of your time as a developer, not necessarily developer, we have the product manager guild and we have the UX guild. And 20% of your time in Wix is for the guild. And in the guild, you can contribute to open source. You can make your own open source. So this is if you have something in your mind that you want to create and contribute to the community, you can do it in your guild time. So every 2 weeks, we met all the native developers in the same room and talked about the open source and stuff. And you can contribute to Wix open source or to another open source outside Wix. But this is only one part of open sourcing. The main thing about open sourcing that we, as a rule of thumb, every non-Wix related code should be open source. It starts from React Native navigation, and it continues with Wix React Native UI lib, and all the libraries that is not Wix related. What I mean Wix related, it has no relation to Wix. So we try to make it open source for 2 reasons. First, we want people to work for us. No, I'm kidding. We want people to fix our bugs, because let's take, for example, React Native navigation. It started as an open source. At the beginning, we was the only one that used this library. After a few months, we understand that we have more than, 3,000 stars. And today we are more than 10K. And most of the features, let's say a side menu or toast, came from the community and not from our code. And we use these features. So it's amazing. And the second reason is just because we like to contribute to the community. We are like to talk about the stuff that we are doing, not only in the mobile guild, but only on the Fed guild. We have tons of open source. So for your question, it depends. It depends if this open source that I'm working on is something that we are using at Wix, or it's different. Let's take another example. It's Detox. If you're familiar with, Detox is a library that gives you the option to test your code in React Native. And because it's so community oriented, the guys from Facebook took it and put it to be part of React Native itself. So now you can use Detox. They use Detox in React Native code base. So it's amazing. So it depends. Most of the time,
that's really amazing.
Yeah, it helped us because before the release of React Native, we talked with them and understand if they break us and stuff. But it's really amazing.
Yeah, I can speak for our experience with Detox. It's been really good. We've really appreciated that all the open source work that Wix has done for the community over many years now. It's been really fantastic. I mean, otherwise, like our testing options were pretty limited. We had Appium, which has its own issues, which I think is why you over there at Wix built Detox, was because of some of the issues with Appium. And so it's become a standard part of our stack. I know with our boilerplate Ignite, we put it in by default. We actually ask, when you're when you're creating a new app, we ask, do you want to install Detox? And then we implement that for you. And Rodham, I'm going to butcher his last name.
Yeah, Rodham Mizrahi, Meidan.
Thank you very much. But he spoke at Chain React 2018 about Detox and talked about, I think it was about a year into using it, and how they, how he and the team at Wix built it, and testing, what it's like to test with it. So we can link to his talk in the show notes as well for people to check it out. I'm a big fan of Detox. I think there's, that one of the big questions I think I've had with Wix open source has been primarily around sort of, the maintenance after the fact, because I think that appropriately Wix is really focused on their internal customer, the people that are going to be using it within Wix. And so, when we're using it outside of Wix, it's kind of up to us to provide the support for everything beyond that, which is totally appropriate. But that has been kind of one of the main questions. It's the same thing with React Native navigation. We used it on a project and it went well. Like it worked really well. But we've stuck with React navigation so far, just simply because there's a lot of more maybe community buy-in from the outside. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that, kind of your approach to open source maintenance and that sort of thing. I know from our perspective, we have a lot of open source out there, and it's very hard to stay up on it when community comes in and says, hey, I need this or I need that. It's very difficult.
Yeah. So to be honest, it's an interesting question. I tell you why. Because we have a lot of discussion internally about it. Let's take three, for example. Our main open source at Wix mobile is Detox, is React Native Navigation, it's a Detox Instrument, and it's UILib. So all of them, this is the main open source. React Native Navigation is the biggest open source at Wix, even in the FAD, in the server. So we had a discussion about how much resources we need to put on it, even if it's not necessary for Wix. Again, let's talk about navigation. So it's worked for us. We, for example, not necessarily need the side menu on iOS, or we not necessarily need the split view in Android for tablets. But we realized that we have a huge and important library, and we need to take responsibility for the community. So we decided for the big open source to make a dedicated team and dedicated developer to put the effort 100% on these libraries. And it's the same for React Native Navigation. We have 2 stars. It's Guy and Yogev, one for iOS and one for Android. That from lately they're 100% on it. On the feature, they made their own roadmaps for the next queue, and you can see in between the tasks they have tasks not necessarily for weeks. And I'm pretty sure it's the same with big open source in Facebook, like React Native. I'm not sure that's all the React Native. I'm pretty sure that's all the React Native code is not necessarily for Facebook. Even not 80% of it is not for Facebook.
Yeah, totally.
And it's the same for Detox and Detox Instrument. It's a tool for creating performance monitoring for the application. And again, we are using these tools, but not necessarily all the features. But we take we are responsible for other people as well. But this is the nice part. On the other hand, we have open source. We have some libraries that are open source, and we do not have time for them. I can give you an example about a React Native Camera Kit. It's a library that we implemented kind of 2.5 years ago. It's a library that gives you the option to take a picture, go into the native library's pictures, and to be honest, we're already not using this library. We have different native implementation inside the application, and we are trying to keep open and release features and bug fixes, but again, it's required 100% of some developer, and sometimes it's impossible. So actually, we are discussing it right now. The option is to move it to the community, like React Native team did with async storage and stuff like this. So there is gonna be a new maintainer, and gonna take the ownership of the library and continue to support it. Because if it's not relevant for us, probably it's gonna be relevant for other people. So so it depends. It depends how many users there are and how they use them, and if there is another library. So it really depends.
Yeah, it's great to hear that you're devoting individual resources to those projects. That's a big deal for the community for sure, because that's one of the big questions is kind of how is this going to be supported, and that's great to hear. And moving things to the React Native community can definitely be a good option. I did that with the web view that moved over to the community, and we were able to get a bunch of bunch of PRs merged that that Facebook didn't really need, but the community did, and that was helpful. Of course, it's always difficult to maintain that level of energy later, especially with something that's more of a utility library like WebView. It's not quite as exciting as something, like Detox Instruments or something, really kind of fun, Reactatron or whatever. So that's a perpetual problem, but I don't think anybody solved that.
Yeah, I'm totally agree with you. It's a thing, and it's an issue because, in my perspective, I can take async storage as an example. I'm not sure that it was the right move by React Native team, because async storage is something that's crucial for the application, and when you put it in the community, if one single small PR can break thousands of applications, and for sure everyone using async storage. So you need to be super sensitive about the ownership, who you transfer the ownership to, and this is our problem, because take Camera Kit for example. So we have a question in the README file. We are open to someone to take the ownership for this library, and there is nobody jump yet. We're trying to find someone, but it's not easy.
Hey folks, this is Charles Max Wood, and I just launched my book, The Max Coder's Guide to Finding Your Dream Developer Job. It's up on Amazon. We self-published it. I would love your support. If you want to go check it out, you can find it there, The Max Coder's Guide to Finding Your Dream Developer Job. Have a good one. Max out.
That reminds me of a talk by Lorenzo Chandra, who was a guest on the podcast a few months ago at Chain React last year. He talked about the React Native community and the role that it plays, and kind of shared about the complexities of it, the benefits for just what y'all are describing, putting these really foundational utility libraries in a place that the community can share them together. And it's not owned by Facebook, and it's not owned by an individual maintainer, but also the challenges of figuring out who's a reliable maintainer, who can be trusted, and things like that. So if anybody's interested in this process or interested in getting more involved in the React Native open source world, there's a lot of options there in Lorenzo's talk, and so that'll be in the show notes as well.
I actually saw this slides at this talk, and super recommend about it, because it's interesting to know how complicated it is to, as you said, manage all this library and contribution and approve PR and the processes. It's amazing.
Can I ask a few questions back to the native architecture, kind of getting into some technical details?
Sure.
One thing I was curious about is, does each module have its own data storage like Redux or something like that, or is data getting kind of shared in a common place?
So each module has its own state manager. It can be Redux, it can be Remix. And moreover, we allow each one of them to bring its own version of Redux and Remix. So module A has Remix 5, and module B can use Remix 4. Remix is I didn't say it, but Remix is another open source. It's a wrapper around Mobix. So each module can use whatever you want. If you want to use it or not, whatever you want.
Another question I had was about the user interface at the top level of the app. So, the engine is booted up, it's loaded up the different modules, but we have the very first screen. How does the engine decide what to display there at the top level?
Okay, so we have actually one main module is the engine. The second one is the platform. Platform is a module that is not product oriented. It's the one that's decide what do you see when the app come to foreground, which tab to load, and actually it's all APIs. The engine, the module can expose. We have again the engine expose API that's called tabs, and you as a module can declare that your module expose a new tab in the application. Currently, we have 3 of them. Actually 3, and 1 is only for the internal application. 1 is the home, the second one is chat, and the third one is the account, my account. And it's 3 different modules. Each one of them exposes a new tab. And specifically, the tabs API is protected by a whitelist that is inside the engine, because I don't want some module by accident expose a new tab, and suddenly we got a new tab in production. And so the first tab is the platform. That the platform is decide what the user see, and it's kind of connection with the engine team, mostly because I manage both of them. So we have the quiet environment that's all going to be good when you open the app, but the platform is open in different screens. Let's take, for example, when you open the Wix app, you can see the list of all your sites, and when you go inside one place, you have an upper tabs to see all the verticals that you have. If you have booking service, so you can see the booking and all the rest. But the platform is the main one.
Makes sense. You also mentioned in your talk that having the engine separated out helps with React Native upgrades, because it can be complex and with a very large app that can happen. One thing I'm curious about, do engine updates ever result in breaking modules? And how can you test to make sure that those upgrades to a React Native version or some other native code doesn't end up breaking something in one of the many modules?
Okay, so it's super relevant, because today we release a new engine and break all the company. So it can happen. Theoretically, we not trying to make as less as possible breaking changes in the engine. The engine has like all other library, a major version that if you break in, he upgrade, and we pronounce it. We send all developer in the guild the message beforehand that we are going to upgrade the major version of the engine, and we break in the API. But there's some cases that we are breaking them, and one of them is, as you said, a React Native upgrade. So React Native upgrade is the process is the first thing that we are doing is we are upgrading the engine itself. Let's say in the last upgrade, we change all the native Android code to Android X, and we upgrade the pod files for the iOS, and then we have a stable engine. And so we run the major version, and we freeze the release of the application. What we are doing, we release this engine version to the developers, and then we have a dedicated week for all the modules developers to adapt to engine changes. And it's much faster than doing it in parallel, because at the beginning we had all on the same repository, and the module want to run fast, and me as an infrastructure developer want to upgrade the native code. It was a mess. Now it's like it's kind of download the new application to the new OS, or you need to adopt your application to Android X. It's kind of the same. You download the new SDK, you change your code, and then release a fix.
That makes sense. It's interesting to see how the metaphor or the mental model of an operating system is so helpful. It's like, wait, this is a way we can think about the relationship between these two. And it just seems like so many helpful patterns fall out of that.
I know that, to be honest, when I talk about it, it sounds perfect, but in reality it's not perfect, because to upgrade React Native application is a nightmare, because there is everything is breaking change, and most of the work is in the engine. But you need to remember that as an opposite to OS or an Android, we can't release a new version of the application until all the modules finish the migration, because otherwise part of the application is going to be broken. So it sometimes can take 1.5, 2 weeks until all 100 developers go over the code. That's most of it is deprecated or in maintenance mode, because there is nothing to develop there, and need to go back to the code and fix did mount to unsafe or things like that. And it's a bummer, but there is nothing to do about it.
Yeah, upgrades have just continually been an issue, not necessarily so much for React Native itself anymore, although that can still be a thing for sure, but they've improved that process.
Yeah,
but really it's third-party modules that tend to really break a lot. I'm hopeful that this year it will start slowing down a little bit in terms of the amount of breaking changes. Well, at least after the fabric changes and turbo modules and everything kind of hit the ground. But yeah, that's we always seem to be kicking that can down the road. I'm hopeful at some point.
Yeah, I hope too, because I can give you other two examples. For example, we want to use Hermes, and we currently can't use it because our part of the problem that we are heavily dependent on proxies and the initialization. And on the other part, we wanted to use inline require flag. And in both cases, we just changed the code in the engine and release to the QA a version of all the app with the dedicated engine. And it's helped us for the processes like this, because in Hermes, for example, if we change the engine, it shouldn't be nothing with the modules themselves.
Yeah, that's been an issue for us as well. We use MobX and MobX State Tree, and we can't upgrade to the latest version of MobX because it relies on proxy. And I've talked with the Hermes team, and they are very aware that proxy is required. One of the problems is that when you add proxy to the mix, when it's a possibility, there is a performance hit because now there's some assumptions you can't make anymore. You can't. You have to explore the execution path a little more and see like what's actually getting called here in order to execute it properly. So it's a little bit of a bummer, but they're totally working on it. The goal for them is to support proxy at some point here.
Yeah, I hope.
I actually I gave the suggestion. I don't know if it's something that's actually a valid path or not, but to do some sort of a static analysis of the bundle, because when the React Native app starts, it has access to all the JavaScript it's going to be executing. And because of that, it can do a static analysis of the bundle and see, am I using any proxies here?
Yeah.
If I'm not, then you can kind of like short circuit all the checking and everything like that. Like you could do some sort of runtime thing there. So hopefully they can come up with something where they can.
Actually, it's a great idea. Actually. Yeah. But to be honest, it's not only the proxies, because when I did a POC on Hermes with a Wix mobile app, I understand that there are tons of other features in JavaScript that are not supported. A lot of ES7 features and other stuff that they're not working out of the box. Yeah. But proxy is one of the major things, and I hope they got into it.
Totally. I want to go back really quickly to detox instruments. Despite us using detox for a long time, I wasn't even aware of detox instruments. I didn't even know that it existed. And I've been doing a little Googling as we've been talking here, and I'm not seeing a lot of, there's some really, it looks like pretty extensive documentation on the repo itself, but I'm not seeing any talks or anything like that. Do you happen to know, at least offhand, or maybe where we can look to see are there any talks that we can look at to see kind of how to use this tool? It looks really cool.
Okay, so unfortunately there isn't. Detox Instruments is currently only for iOS. Why Detox Instruments is just because we use the same infrastructure of Detox, that we put all the markets inside the code to give you an analysis of what's happening in the app. It's kind of similar to Flipper, but it's written totally in native. There is no talks, but we are using it inside. It's a good point. Actually, I need to talk with Leo, that is one of the developers, to go and spread the word about it. Detox Instruments give us the option to understand what's happened under the hood. At the beginning, when the bridge was an issue, so it helped us to understand what's go over the bridge, and from the JavaScript to the native and back. It's helped us to understand what is the CPU of the JavaScript side, and network requests. It's even helped us to understand that we need to use inline require, because when the app go to foreground, you see that all the dependencies tree is loaded, and we need to fix it. So it's actually give us the markers how much time is take to load each of the modules, the JavaScript modules. And it's had a lot of insights, and I really encourage you to take a look and use it. It's super simple to integrate it into the app, and I hopefully think that it can help you to understand some performance issue in the app.
That's great. Maybe that's something that that you all could give a talk at Chain React on. I'm one of the organizers of Chain React, and we've had Wix engineers give talks in the past, and it'd be awesome to maybe have a talk about that at some point.
Cool. Are you trying it?
Let's go ahead to picks to wrap up our talk today. Chris, why don't you share your picks first?
Yeah, sounds good. So I'm going to choose the book, The Millionaire Next Door. It's a real good book, and it kind of just talks about some of the traits of millionaires, like kind of like living below your means and choosing the right occupation for yourself. It's on Audible, so if you like to exercise or do your thing and learn at the same time, you can pick it up there, or just the paperback. I definitely recommend it. It's a great read. That's all I got.
Jamon, how about you?
I've been watching a YouTube series on, I think it's from a couple of years ago, or even 2017, but it's from Ars Technica. It's called War Stories, and it's all about in the game programming industry, talking like these famous games, these famous game developers talking about major problems that they ran into, where they built entire systems and then had to rip them out and had to replace them, and it's just like I don't know. I just love programming war stories, and this is just a series just jam packed with them. So definitely check that out.
Cool. Omri, do you have any picks for us?
Actually, a few months ago, I've been in the React Advanced in London, and I watched one of the talks was of Kiza. Kiza, the talk was something between tech talk and stand-up comedy. It's one of the funniest tech talk that I ever saw, and I encourage each one of you to watch. He is actually left on all the developers in the world that we are doing unnecessary work instead of serve our users. It's super funny. A lot of recommendation.
Great. My pick for this week, a friend of mine named Jonathan Martin gave a talk a few years ago called Collaborating with Mountaintop Mesh Networks. And this is where I first learned about academic approaches to data synchronization and offline and even decentralized, where you don't have a central server that can authoritatively say which data change is the latest. And so he shares a bunch of cool stuff in there. Operational transforms is a concept for like how you make these changes without conflicting, or for the system to be able to decide if you and I both make a change to a similar thing in the data, which one wins. And CRDTs, I forget what it stands for. It's like conflict-free replicated data types. So it's a way to structure your data so that conflicts are impossible. It just handles it for you. So it's really interesting stuff, a great accessible introduction to this. And as I mentioned a week or two ago, as I'm getting interested in offline and data synchronization stuff, I just talked to him on the phone last night to hear kind of the latest of what he's thinking about in that area. But yeah, check out this talk to learn about offline, because I think especially in the mobile development world, it's a new frontier, and it's a place that I think things are going to go in the next 5 years. Well, that's about all for today. Omri, thanks so much for joining with us and talking with us.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks everyone, and we will see you next week. Bye.
Thanks everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CACHEFLY.com to learn more.